We would like to begin this evening's entertainment with a very, very special love song, and I'd like to dedicate this song to my beautiful wife, Lorraine. I love you.
And I would also like to take this moment to dedicate this beautiful love song to our beautiful wife, Lorraine, and our beautiful child.
So just a second.
In 1969, a hit comedy show vanished from American television without warning, without a goodbye. One moment it was making millions laugh. The next it was banned, buried, and nearly forgotten. Our relationship, I think at that point, things were coming down on us pretty hard, and we started to take care of each other a lot more. We did 72 of those. What happened behind the scenes? What was on that final tape that CBS refused to air? And why did the U.S. president consider two comedians a national threat? Every evening, families across the country tuned into one of three major networks, NBC, ABC, or CBS. Programming was designed to be safe, familiar, and uncontroversial. Shows like The Ed Sullivan Show, Bonanza, and the Beverly Hillbillies dominated the airwaves, offering light entertainment that rarely strayed into the realm of politics or controversy. Television at that time was meant to comfort viewers, not challenge them. But by the mid-1960s, the social climate in the United States was changing rapidly. The Vietnam War was escalating. Civil rights movements were growing stronger, and a new generation of young Americans was starting to question the values of their parents. Protests became more visible, music became more rebellious, and comedy began to shift away from slapstick routines towards something more critical and reflective. The gap between the culture on TV and the reality outside was starting to show. CBS, one of the leading networks, found itself in a difficult position. While it had a solid hold on traditional audiences, it was beginning to lose relevance among younger viewers. NBC had the upper hand on Sunday nights with popular shows, and CBS needed something fresh to compete. The network wanted a variety show that could attract a younger crowd without alienating its core audience. That's when the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour was born. Tom and Dick Smothers were a musical comedy duo who had made a name for themselves with light, quirky performances. Tom played the role of the naive, slightly clueless younger brother, while Dick was a straight man, more serious, more grounded. Their chemistry was natural, and their humor was accessible. When CBS approached them to host a new variety show, the network assumed they were getting harmless, family-friendly content. There was no reason to expect anything radical. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour premiered on February 5, 1967. The first episodes were exactly what CBS had in mind. Musical performances, gentle jokes between the brothers, and comedy sketches that avoided anything too divisive. The show fit neatly into the tradition of other variety shows, blending entertainment with just a touch of modern flair. At first glance, it looked like a safe bet. Viewers found the format familiar, and the ratings were promising. But behind the scenes, things were beginning to shift. Tom Smothers, in particular, wasn't satisfied with simply delivering jokes and songs. He had a growing sense that television could be used to explore real issues, things that mattered to people outside the studio audience. As someone who had become increasingly aware of the political and cultural upheaval of the time, Tom wanted the show to do more than just entertain. He wanted it to speak to the world around him. Slowly, he began introducing new elements into the show. It wasn't a sudden transformation. Tom understood that pushing the boundaries too quickly could backfire, so he did it carefully, bit by bit. He started inviting guests who had strong opinions and weren't afraid to express them. Folk singer Pete Seeger, who had previously been banned from network television for his outspoken political views, appeared on the show to sing anti-war songs. Other guests included Joan Baez, Harry Belafonte, and the rock band Jefferson Airplane, all artists known for their activism and connection to the counterculture. These weren't just musical performances. They carried messages. Seeger's performance of Waist Deep in the Big Muddy was a direct critique of the Vietnam War. Joan Baez sang a dedication to her husband, who was imprisoned for refusing to fight. The Who performed with such intensity that they shattered their instruments on stage. These moments were carefully woven into the structure of the show so they wouldn't immediately raise alarm bells at the network. But their meaning wasn't lost on viewers, especially younger ones. Tom also brought in a new wave of writers who shared his vision. Among them was a young Steve Martin, who would later become one of the most influential comedians of his generation. These writers were closer in age to the audience the show was starting to attract. They understood the mood of the time. Restless, questioning, disillusioned. Their sketches started to evolve from simple gags to more pointed observations about society, politics, and the media. From the outside, the show still looked like a typical variety program. It had music, laughter, and colorful sets. But under the surface, it was becoming something much more ambitious. Comedy was being used as a tool not just to entertain, but to provoke thought. As the show matured, so did its audience. College students began watching in large numbers. They didn't just enjoy the humor. They felt it represented them. For many, it was the first time television seemed to reflect their beliefs, their frustrations, and their hopes. However, not everyone was pleased with this new direction. Many older viewers, particularly in more conservative parts of the country, began to express their concerns. Local CBS affiliates in the southern United States started receiving letters and phone calls complaining about the show's content. Some stations threatened to stop airing it. The network began to feel pressure from both inside and outside. While the ratings among young people were strong, there was growing discomfort among advertisers and executives who preferred television to remain apolitical. Tom Smothers, for his part, wasn't backing down. He believed that the show had a responsibility to say something meaningful. He also believed that satire and comedy had unique power to make people think in ways that direct messaging often couldn't. But this approach meant walking a very fine line. Each episode had to pass through CBS's censors, and the more political the content became, the more difficult those conversations were. Scripts were reviewed, edits were demanded, and disagreements became more frequent. Still, the show kept pushing forward. Tom continued to use a platform to highlight issues that were otherwise being ignored by mainstream media. Whether it was a war in Vietnam, racial injustice, or freedom of speech, the show touched on topics that many Americans were grappling with, but rarely saw addressed on television. Dick Smothers, while generally more cautious than his brother, stood by him. Their partnership remained solid even as the show became more controversial. Dick handled much of production and management work, helping to keep things running while Tom focused on content. It was a balancing act, and for a while, they managed to keep it together. By the end of its first year, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour had transformed from a conventional variety show into a subtle, subversive platform that captured the spirit of a generation. It was doing something no other show on network television was attempting, using comedy to challenge authority, question norms, and connect with a changing audience. It wasn't just entertainment anymore. It was a conversation with the country. Tom Smothers had become the driving force behind this change. He saw the show not just as a chance to entertain, but as a rare opportunity to say something that mattered. While many variety shows of the time avoided sensitive topics, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour leaned into them. Through humor, music, and carefully crafted sketches, it began addressing subjects that were often considered off-limits for mainstream television. The writing team played a crucial role in this transformation. Alongside Steve Martin, a new generation of young, ambitious writers joined the staff. Many were deeply connected to the cultural revolution of the 1960s and brought fresh ideas and perspectives to the table. They were interested in satire that didn't just poke fun, but that revealed deeper truths about politics, media, and social structures. Their work resonated strongly with the younger audience the show was attracting. Musical guests continued to be a key part of the program, but now their performances often carried powerful political messages. Artists like Jefferson Airplane used their appearances to push boundaries, singing songs that referenced drug culture, war, and rebellion. Joan Baez performed a song in honor of her husband, David Harris, who was in prison for resisting the draft. These moments were not just entertainment. They were statements. Viewers knew they were seeing something different, something that wasn't happening on any other television show. Comedy sketches also began to evolve. Pat Paulson, a regular on the show, became known for his mock presidential campaign. His character made absurd promises and delivered speeches filled with contradictions, highlighting the perceived emptiness of real political rhetoric. It was satire, but it was also a form of protest. The humor was dry, deadpan, and clearly pointed. Many viewers, especially students, found themselves quoting his lines. In casual conversation, and classroom discussions. The show also began featuring David Steinberg, a comedian whose act was unlike anything else on network TV at the time. He performed sermon-style monologues dressed as a preacher or religious figure, blending biblical references with commentary on current events. His sketches were clever, often hilarious, but also bold. By mixing the sacred with the political, Steinberg challenged viewers to think critically about both religion and authority. Not surprisingly, some of his material struck a nerve. In October 1968, CBS affiliates in several cities refused to air an episode that featured one of Steinberg's sermons. They claimed it was offensive to religious viewers. The network received more than 300 angry phone calls and letters in just a few days. Despite this backlash, many young viewers and university students loved Steinberg's performances. They saw them as intelligent, brave, and representative of their own questioning attitudes. Bootleg recordings of the censored sketches started circulating on college. Campuses treated almost like underground art as the show grew more daring. CBS executives became increasingly uncomfortable. They began implementing stricter controls. The Smothers brothers were now required to submit each episode 10 days before its scheduled air date. This gave the network time to review, censor, or even reject content before it could reach the public. However, Tom Smothers didn't always comply. He often delivered tapes at the last possible moment or even late, hoping that it would be too difficult for CBS to make changes in time. This strategy occasionally worked, but also added to the tension between creators and the network. Behind-the-scenes meetings between Tom Smothers and CBS executives became increasingly tense. What had once been a cordial relationship now felt more like a standoff. The executives wanted to maintain control over what aired under the CBS banner. Tom wanted creative freedom. He believed that if television didn't reflect what was happening in the world, it wasn't doing its job. This difference in philosophy became harder and harder to bridge. Dick Smothers, ever more measured of the two, found himself in a difficult position. He supported his brother's vision, but also understood the network's concerns. While Tom was pushing the limits, Dick was often the one trying to negotiate a compromise to keep the show alive. He worked to maintain relationships with producers and network staff, tried to ensure that their work wouldn't be taken off the air. But the gap between the show's content and the network's tolerance kept widening. As the show entered early 1969, the stakes continued to rise. The cultural divide in America was becoming more pronounced, and the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour was sitting right in the middle of it. On one hand, the show had a devoted audience of young viewers who felt it spoke directly to them. On the other, it faced increasing pressure from CBS advertisers and conservative viewers who believed it had gone too far. Local stations began to complain more frequently, and some advertisers started to express concerns about being associated with controversial content. The atmosphere around the show became more cautious. CBS executives started reviewing not only scripts but also guest invitations. Every joke, sketch, and performance was now subject to potential scrutiny and removal. Despite all this, the creative team behind the show continued to push forward. They believed that their message was worth the risk. The political climate of the late 1960s, marked by protests, political assassinations, and ongoing war, demanded a response. They saw their platform as one of the few places on television where these topics could be addressed openly, even if only through humor and metaphor. The strain eventually began to show. Writers, producers, and performers worked under the constant threat of censorship. Rewrites were frequent, and there was always a possibility that entire segments would be cut. The creative process, once exciting and collaborative, became stressful and combative. Still, the team kept going, determined to use their limited space to say something that mattered. The very success of the show, particularly with the youth demographic, only heightened the conflict. While young viewers remained loyal, the network grew increasingly uneasy with the backlash from other segments of the population. It was a classic case of a show being too popular to cancel outright, yet too controversial to manage easily. CBS found itself caught between the need for ratings and the desire to maintain control over its programming. In the end, the question facing CBS was one of control versus creativity. Could a network allow a show to challenge its own boundaries? Could it tolerate a level of political engagement that risked offending parts of its audience? These weren't just questions about one program. They were about the role of television in American life. And as it turned out, the answers would soon come in the form of a decision that would change the course of TV history. The network had tightened its grip significantly. Every script, performance, and sketch had to be vetted well in advance. 10 days was the official deadline for submitting each completed episode. But in practice, things didn't always go according to plan. Tom Smothers, determined not to compromise his vision, frequently delayed delivery. He believed that if he gave CBS too much time to review the content, they'd cut or block the most meaningful parts. So he sometimes sent tapes at the very last minute, or even a few hours late, knowing that it put the network in a difficult position. This approach created friction not just with executives, but also within the production team. Everyone was under immense pressure. Editing often went on until the final moments before broadcast. Meetings with CBS executives were no longer polite discussions. They had become intense arguments. The environment behind the scenes was growing more tense with each passing week. Meanwhile, the show's content continued to push boundaries. Some of the musical acts became louder and more confrontational. Rock bands like The Who played with a kind of reckless energy that mirrored the frustration of the youth audience. In one particularly chaotic performance, they played so loudly and destructively that they blew out sound equipment in the studio. Joan Baez used her airtime to sing about her husband's imprisonment for resisting the draft. Jefferson Airplane performed songs openly referencing drugs and rebellion. These weren't accidental choices. The guests were selected not just for their talent, but for their messages. The comedy sketches became more daring as well. Pat Paulson's faux presidential campaign continued to draw laughs, but also made pointed statements about the state of American politics. His character promised absurd solutions like increasing the number of potholes to test voter patience, a joke that, while ridiculous on the surface, was actually a biting critique of political apathy and government inefficiency. But the most provocative material came from David Steinberg. His sermon-style monologues had already sparked backlash, especially among religious viewers. CBS had received hundreds of complaints following his earlier performances, and many local affiliates had chosen not to air certain episodes that featured him. Despite this, Tom Smothers remained a strong supporter of Steinberg's work. He believed the material was smart, relevant, and fair, even if it was controversial. Then came the tipping point. In early April 19th, 1969, Tom Smothers submitted an episode that featured Steinberg returning to perform another sermon sketch. This time the content was more direct and politically charged than ever before. The set was designed to look like a church, complete with a pulpit and a spotlight. Steinberg walked on stage dressed as a rabbi and began delivering a monologue that turned the biblical story of Moses into an allegory for the anti-war movement. In his version, Moses wasn't simply a religious leader following divine orders. Instead, he was portrayed as a man guided by conscience, someone willing to stand up against unjust power. At the climax of the sketch, Moses turned to Pharaoh, thinly veiled as a metaphor for the U.S. president, and said, "Sorry, Mr. President, but take your army and go. I will not help you anymore." The audience in the studio broke into applause. For viewers in the room, it was a powerful, resonant moment. For CBS executives, it was a final straw. The sketch ended with a folk group performing a song called No More Promised Lands. The lyrics urged young people to stop relying on empty government promises and instead make their own choices about peace, war, and personal responsibility. At the very end of the performance, Steinberg threw his prayer shawl into the audience and shouted, "Peace, not war." It was a theatrical, emotional moment, and one that CBS had no intention of airing. When the network received the tape, it didn't hesitate. Executives immediately declared that the episode would not be broadcast. Officially, CBS claimed that the episode had missed a deadline and therefore violated a production agreement. Tom Smothers disputed this, insisting that the tape had been delivered on time and that the network was using timing as an excuse to avoid airing controversial material. Privately, CBS executives demanded that the entire Steinberg sketch be removed. They told Tom that if he made the necessary cuts, the episode could still air, but Tom refused. For him, removing the segment would be a betrayal of everything the show had come to represent. He stood his ground, knowing full well what the consequences might be. On April 4th, 1969, CBS officially canceled the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. There was no public statement, no press conference, and no opportunity for the brothers to say goodbye to their audience. The following week, the show's regular time slot was taken over by Yeehaw, a country-themed comedy program that was deliberately apolitical and non-controversial. The message was clear. CBS wanted to avoid trouble. The unaired episode never made it to American television, but did air in Canada, where CBS had no editorial control. Bootleg copies quickly began to circulate among students and activists in the U.S. The banned episode took on a kind of legendary status. People gathered in dorm rooms and coffee shops to watch it on worn VHS tapes. Campus newspapers analyzed the content in detail, calling a bold and fitting farewell to a show that had dared to speak openly during a time of cultural upheaval. Reactions were divided. Young audiences saw the cancellation as a betrayal, a sign that the network cared more about pleasing advertisers and avoiding controversy than about free speech or artistic integrity. Protests took place at CBS offices in several cities, though they were relatively small. On the other hand, conservative groups praised the network's decision, arguing that the show had crossed a line and needed to be shut down. For Tom and Dick Smothers, the cancellation was devastating. Offers from other networks disappeared overnight. Tom was seen as too difficult and too political to work with. Dick, despite being the more moderate of the two, also found himself blacklisted simply by association. Their careers in television came to a sudden halt, but they didn't walk away quietly. The Smothers Brothers filed a lawsuit against CBS, accusing the network of breaching their contract and canceling the show for political reasons. The legal battle stretched out over several years. In 1973, a court ruled in favor of the Smothers Brothers, awarding them over $770,000 in damages. But by then, the momentum of their careers had been lost. The cancellation also put a strain on their personal relationship. In interviews years later, Dick admitted that he didn't always agree with Tom's approach. He believed that if Tom had been willing to make a few compromises, the show might have survived longer and reached even more people. But he also acknowledged that Tom's refusal to back down was part of what made the show so powerful. After its cancellation in April 1969, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour left behind more than an empty time slot. What had started as a mainstream variety show had, in just a few seasons, become one of the most influential and controversial programs in American television history. Its sudden removal from the air was seen by many as not just the end of the show, but the silencing of a rare voice that had dared to reflect the turbulence of its time. In the years immediately following the cancellation, Tom and Dick Smothers faced a fallout. Their once bright television careers dimmed quickly. Networks were hesitant to work with them, especially with Tom, who had become a symbol of conflict with network authority. While Dick was seen as more diplomatic and less politically confrontational, he too was viewed with suspicion simply because of his association with the show. The entertainment industry, which often favors stability and predictability, turned away from the brothers almost overnight. Despite the personal and professional setbacks, Tom and Dick didn't give up. They toured together, performing for loyal fans in live shows across the country. Their dynamic remained intact. Tom, the impulsive and idealistic younger brother, and Dick, the more grounded and measured counterpart. While the scale of their performances was smaller, the support they received from their audiences was no less enthusiastic. Meanwhile, the cultural impact of the show began to reveal itself more clearly. Among young writers, producers, and comedians, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour became a landmark example of what television could be when it was unafraid to take risks. The show's mix of humor, music, and political commentary helped redefine what variety entertainment was capable of. It proved that comedy could do more than entertain. It could inform, provoke, and inspire. One of the many people influenced by the show was Lorne Michaels, who would go on to create Saturday Night Live in the mid-1970s. Michaels later acknowledged that without the example set by the Smothers Brothers, there might not have been an SNL. The idea that a sketch show could also function as political and social commentary had been introduced to network TV through the Smothers Brothers' work. The legal battle between the Smothers brothers and CBS eventually came to a close in 1973 when a court ruled in favor of the brothers and awarded them $776,300 for breach of contract. But while the ruling offered a degree of vindication, it could not reverse the damage that had already been done to their careers. Tom Smothers in particular struggled with the consequences of having been so outspoken during a time when the industry wasn't ready for open confrontation. He remained proud of the show's legacy, but was acutely aware of what had been lost. Over time, public opinion began to shift. What had once seemed reckless or controversial came to be seen as brave and forward-thinking. As society changed and the political climate evolved, people began to reassess the show's place in history. The jokes, musical performances, and monologues that once caused so much uproar started to feel remarkably relevant again, sometimes even prophetic. In 2008, nearly 4 decades after Cancellation, Tom Smothers was awarded an honorary Emmy. In his short acceptance speech, he said, "Peace is harder than war," a simple sentence that echoed the ideals he had fought to express on the show so many years earlier. The moment was understated but deeply symbolic. It marked a rare recognition from the very industry that had once considered him too controversial to support. 2 years later, in 2010, both Tom and Dick Smothers were inducted into the Television Academy Hall of Fame. The induction was more than a tribute to their work as entertainers. It was an acknowledgement of their cultural significance and the risk they had taken in trying to move television into new and untested territory. It was also a form of closure, a sign that the industry had at last begun to come to terms with its own past. In the years that followed, the legacy of the show continued to grow. It was revealed through released documents that both Tom and Dick Smothers had been placed on President Richard Nixon's infamous enemies list, a confidential list of individuals the administration saw as political threats. While many on that list were journalists or politicians, the inclusion of 2 television comedians highlighted just how deeply the show had struck a nerve. It was now clear that the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour hadn't just entertained viewers. It had genuinely challenged those in power. By 2022, the show's full archive, including scripts, unaired sketches, production notes, and internal CBS memos, was transferred to University of California, Santa Barbara. This move ensured that the material would be preserved for future generations of researchers, students, and artists. Among the archive's contents were several sketches CBS had tried to destroy, along with handwritten notes from Tom Smothers that revealed the detailed thought process behind many of the show's most memorable moments. The digitization of the archive opened the door to a new wave of interest. For the first time, people could access the show's legacy without relying on rumors or scattered bootleg copies. Researchers began examining how the show functioned as a form of political communication, while filmmakers and cultural historians used materials to explore the limits of free speech in corporate media. Documentaries were produced, university courses cited the show as a case study, and media scholars placed it within the broader story of American protest culture. The resurgence of interest wasn't limited to academia. On social media platforms like YouTube, TikTok, and Reddit, clips from the show began resurfacing. Sketches that once sparked outrage were now being viewed as early examples of satire that dared to challenge the status quo. The line, "Mom always liked you best," once a simple punchline, became a widely recognized cultural reference used in memes and nostalgic throwbacks. A segment from Pat Paulson's fake 1968 presidential campaign, where he proposed solving all problems by waiting for them to go away, found new life as a viral video in a political landscape not too different from the one it mocked decades earlier. When Tom Smothers passed away in late 2023, tributes poured in from across the world. Comedians, musicians, and television hosts reflected on his influence. Stephen Colbert, John Oliver, and Sarah Silverman all credited Tom and the show as trailblazers who had helped shape modern political comedy. They spoke of him not just as a pioneer, but as someone who had refused to let fear or pressure dictate what could or couldn't be said in front of a national audience. At the New York Television Festival, a special memorial event was held where the previously banned David Steinberg sermon was shown in full. For many young viewers, it was the first time they had seen a performance that CBS had once deemed too dangerous to air. Far from feeling outdated, the material struck a chord. Its directness, humor, and moral clarity felt as urgent as ever, proving that some forms of truth-telling don't lose their power with time. Today, the influence of the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour can be felt in countless ways. Modern television is more open to political commentary than it once was, and comedians are now expected to engage with serious topics, as well as provide laughs. Shows like The Daily Show, Last Week Tonight, and even sketch-based programs like Key and Peele owe a debt to what Tom and Dick Smothers helped start. They laid the groundwork for a form of comedy that is smart, bold, and unafraid to speak directly to power. The show is no longer on the air, but its legacy continues through its words, its images, and its impact. It serves as a reminder that comedy can be more than just entertainment. It can be a reflection of the world, a challenge to authority, and a spark for change. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that the struggle for creative freedom is never truly over. Each generation of artists must face it in their own way, just as the Smothers Brothers did all those years ago.